Hi, I'm James from Chaosium. I sat down with Jeff Richard and we talked about the gods of Glorantha. Specifically, we talked about the gods from the perspective of somebody who is coming in brand new to the setting. Maybe they've just picked up the RuneQuest starter set and they want a brief overview of what the general feel of the gods of the world are. I started off the interview by asking Jeff what his standard system for pushing players towards a particular god when they're first starting out is. I'm going to jump across to that interview in just a moment, but first, remember to subscribe to the Chaosium YouTube channel. It helps us out and it lets us make more content like this. Thanks.
Oh, I try to push players who are just new to RuneQuest. I try to push them towards the main gods of what are called the Lightbringers pantheon. That's the 7 Lightbringers: Ernalda, Humacht, Yomalio, and maybe Stormbull.
What archetypes do those gods fit within the classic, adventurer's toolkit? Who suits a good fighter? Who suits a good rogue? Is there like a one-sentence description you can give?
Yeah, the 7 Lightbringers are led by Orlanth. He's the storm god, the king of the gods, worshipped by warriors and nobles and kings and farmers. There's Isseries. He's the god of communication and of travel. He's kind of a Hermes figure, worshipped by merchants and wanderers and speakers. There's Lankor Mai, the god of knowledge and wisdom. There is Shalana Roy, the goddess of healing and mercy. There's a more complicated one, Ermal, who's the trickster. And this is that divine archetype of the trickster, the clown, the coyote or Loki. But we have also got Ernalda, the Earth Mother, Humacht, the god of death and war, Stormbull, who is the god who fights against chaos, and we have Yomalio, who is the sky and sun god for the Sardarite region.
Fantastic. So some of those archetypes are pretty clear. When you hear Orlanth, king of the gods, you have sort of this noble attitude. When you've got, the goddess of healing, okay, so if I'm playing someone who is healing focused, I'm going to sit there. Some of the gods might not be immediately apparent to people who aren't familiar with RuneQuest. Can you tell us about the god of the sun and the sky?
Okay, so Yomalio is he is a god. He's a solar god. He's sits awkwardly with this pantheon. He's got something of a rivalry with Orlanth, but he's closely associated with Ernalda, the Earth Mother, and he's worshipped by primarily by soldiers that form the feared Sun Dome Templars, and these are mercenary warriors. Think like your Spartiates, of ancient Sparta, with great self-discipline and a purity of purpose.
So if I'm playing a warrior character or someone who is going to be very martial, and I see Orlanth, I see Yomalio, I see, even the Stormbull and Humacht, what's the difference between these gods that could kind of fulfill a martial archetype? And what kind of character am I going to get if I follow each one?
Well, if you're following Orlanth as a warrior, then you're very much within clan and tribal society. This is the model for the warriors that become chiefs and kings, great adventurers, but they are tied with their community as part of a martial elite. They're also the ordinary militia. So this is basically the heroic warrior, that's very hammered down to that society. Whereas Humacht, Humacht is a god he's an ascetic god of death and war. He has a single purpose, and that is to bring death, to be the line between the living and the dead. He's the cosmic sword. Very, very different type of characters. They are removed from society. They're hanging out in funerary grounds covered in ashes, meditating on death, but are the most feared swordsmen in the world. And then you've got Stormbull, which is another martial god. Stormbull exists for one thing, and this one thing makes him tolerated, and that is to be the god that fights against chaos. He's half mad. His warriors are notorious as berserks and as madmen, but they can stand and successfully fight against chaos that would break any lesser being. And then there's Yomalio, and Yomalio is for that martial character who is a soldier who fights as part of a group. His war magic isn't that great, but it's useful to be for fighting as part of a group, and it's also useful if you're fighting against the powers of darkness. So if you're planning on beating up on trolls, Yomalio is a great god.
So some of the other archetypes also immediately make sense. You've got, a scout or ranger as a far traveling god. You've got a thief or a rogue as a trickster god. Can you tell us about Ernalda, the Earth Mother?
So Ernalda is an incredibly powerful goddess. She is the earth. She is the source of life in the world. And so her magic, she has both healing magic and the ability to call upon great, powerful earth elementals. So these are spirits that animate the earth and are manifest in the earth. She has the ability of making the harvest successful, which again, in a game where your community matters, being the one who is able to make sure that the harvest is good and that there is fertility in life is incredibly powerful. And it also means that you have a great social role. People look to their earth priestesses and their wise women for how to deal with situations that don't necessarily require combat. So it's actually one of my favorite cults. It's definitely a player favorite. It's not really in the usual fantasy RPG archetypes, but it's definitely an important archetype in fantasy and mythology.
What about for players who maybe feel a connection with two of the gods or who are sort of wanting to stride the line? Is there a way that you can be involved in two cults in the RuneQuest world?
Well, sure, it's possible to initiate into the higher mysteries of more than one god. The difficulty of that is that obviously when you're trying to explore deep mysteries, the having a single path is going to be easier than having two, but it's possible to be an initiate of Orlanth and any of the other seven Lightbringers, or of Ernalda and Shalana Roy, etc. They trying to initiate to radically different gods is going to be probably pretty difficult. But you see the occasional character that's dual initiated.
I've played in some games of other fantasy TTRPGs where the gods are, sometimes portrayed as very antagonistic figures, and you can have, the entire duration of a campaign being about trying to foil the avatar of one particular god. What happens in RuneQuest if if you want to play a character that isn't connected to the gods, or is that just something that is not apparent in this game?
Everybody in RuneQuest, one way or another, is connected with the other world, with the mythological world. Now, most people do this through worship of the gods, because the gods are present and they're manifest. There are some who prefer to just deal with spirits, shamans who try to deal with the much largely lesser beings of the other world, who could still be very, very powerful and significant in their own right, but they may not be as great as the very archetype of death itself. And there's even those that try to deal with the other world in a materialistic and rationalist manner. These are the sorcerers of the West. But one way or another, everybody in Glorantha has some way, some connection with that divine or spirit world, the other world on the other side of the mundane world. You just don't have anybody who's like, well, I'm just gonna ignore that. I mean, you can have characters that don't do very much with it, but it's just a reality of the setting. There is an other world.